Hey everyone, today we're stepping into a story that feels less like a memory and more like a scar. Healed on the surface, but still leaving a mark I can't stop running my fingers over. Consider this your warning. It's a tale of love, ambition, betrayal, and a dash of irony that might make you roll your eyes or clutch your chest. It's the story of how I helped a man climb his way to becoming a millionaire, only for him to betray me in the end, choosing someone who had far less than we ever did. Sounds unbelievable, right? I promise I'm not exaggerating. Stick with me and you'll see. Before we begin, take a moment to like this video and subscribe if you genuinely enjoy the content. And hey, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. I love seeing how this little community stretches across the globe. So dim the lights, maybe let a fan hum softly in the background, and let's sink into tonight's story together. I first met him when both of us had very little to our names. I was 24, juggling 2 part-time jobs while finishing a business administration degree at night. He was this scruffy, charming dreamer who swore he was just one big idea away from changing his life. That line makes me laugh now. It's the sort of thing people say when they can't even cover rent. But back then, I believed him. There was a spark in his eyes whenever he talked about his ideas. Half-finished tech concepts, apps that never made it past the sketchbook, plans scribbled on napkins. I saw something in him that most people ignored. Maybe it was hope. Maybe it was foolishness. Maybe both. We met at a coffee shop, him with a book about startup culture and a long-forgotten cold coffee, me with a marketing project open on my laptop. We struck up a conversation about how much we both disliked the way people glamorize the grind. That chat stretched into hours. Hours turned into dinners, and dinners turned into what I thought was love. He was broke, but passionate. I was naive, but resourceful. Somehow it felt like the perfect balance. I threw myself into helping him, writing business plans, pitching investors, even dipping into my own savings to buy him a used laptop when his broke mid-prototype. He told me, one day, we'll laugh about these struggles. And for a time, I believed him. Our apartment was tiny, barely enough space to breathe. If one of us sneezed, the other caught it. The kitchen forever smelled like burnt toast, and the walls were so thin we could hear our neighbors fight every night. But I loved it. To me, it was our nest, the launch pad to something bigger. Late nights blurred together, ramen cups on the floor, spreadsheets glowing on the screen. He'd talk excitedly about algorithms and product design while I handled the boring work, emails, budgets, research. He called me his anchor, and I thought it was the most romantic thing anyone had ever said to me. Looking back, that should have been the warning sign. Anchors don't move. They hold others steady, even if it means sinking themselves. But I wasn't thinking about fairness back then. I just wanted him to succeed. When investors turned him down, I lifted him up. When he got a small grant from a local incubator, we celebrated like it was $1 million deal, with instant noodles and a $4 bottle of wine. He used to say I was his secret weapon. I didn't realize I was really the foundation he was building everything on. A year later, one of his apps, simple, clever, finally gained traction. He got his first investor call, his first real paycheck, his first taste of momentum. I still remember the day the money hit his account. He grabbed me, spun me around, and shouted, "We did it." And for a moment, it really felt like we did. By then, I was working full-time while also helping manage the small team he had begun to assemble. Life was chaos, but exhilarating. We were building something out of nothing but caffeine, stubbornness, and hope. Then things began to shift, slowly at first. Our company turned into my company. At networking events, I went from my partner to someone who helped me get started. I told myself it didn't matter. Titles are just words, right? But then there was that night, the launch party for one of his projects. Champagne, flashing cameras, people congratulating him left and right. A journalist asked who had inspired his journey. I was right there, heart swelling. He smiled at the camera and said, honestly, I owe it all to myself. I never gave up. I laughed it off, thinking he was nervous or didn't want to sound dependent. But inside, something cracked. Still, I buried it. Because when you love someone, you call it understanding. You make excuses for them. That night, back at home, he was already sketching out his next big idea. He looked at me and said, "This is just the beginning." And he was right. It was the beginning. Just not of what I imagined. Because as his world expanded, mine began to fade away. At first, the shift was almost invisible, like a faint breeze that hints at an oncoming storm. I was still there, working, planning, supporting, but small details began to sting. Invitations to events no longer included me. When he spoke of me, it was always in the past tense. Someone who helped in the beginning, as though I belonged to a closed chapter. And yet, when he turned to me and smiled, I brushed it off, convincing myself it was nothing but my imagination. We had become efficient in our own messy rhythm. What started as fragile sketches on napkins had grown into a real startup, slowly earning recognition. Investors, journalists, even acquaintances online, they were beginning to notice him. He was praised, celebrated, spotlighted. And me? I was still behind the curtain, pulling strings no one else saw. It was draining, but I clung to the belief that it was worth it. Do you know those nights that smell of burnt coffee and relentless drive? That was us. Hunched over laptops in our cramped apartment, papers and notes scattered everywhere. He pieced together prototypes while I organized the logistics, emails, budgets, marketing strategies. Sometimes he'd joke, half sincere, "I can't believe you put up with all this chaos." And I'd laugh, because to me the chaos was part of the dream, part of the love. Or so I kept telling myself. There were victories too. First, a small angel investment, enough to hire 2 people. Then a larger round, enough for an office, enough to pay ourselves modest salaries. Each milestone should have felt glorious, and in some ways it did. But at the edges of each celebration, I noticed the change. His smile toward me dimmed. At events, he lingered with strangers more than with me. The spark in his eyes that once ignited when we dreamed together now flickered elsewhere. It was the little comments that hurt most. At a meeting with new investors, I heard him introduce me as someone who helped me get started. That phrasing pierced me, helped, as if my role was already finished. Past tense, my heart screamed, though I was still there, still working. But I bit my tongue. I didn't want to be the partner who ruined the image of success we had carefully built. So I pushed forward. I told myself it was temporary, that I just needed patience. Every sleepless night, every weekend lost, every cent I invested, I convinced myself it was all for us. But deep down, I began to sense that the us I believed in was slowly dissolving, like ink bleeding into water. Our first major launch should have been pure joy. The office buzzed with strangers' applause, his name echoing proudly, his face alight with triumph. I was proud too, but when he basked in the praise without a single glance my way, something in me froze. This isn't right, my heart whispered, but I drowned that voice in more work, more coffee, more excuses. Then the changes grew closer, more personal. Messages answered quicker than mine. Calls returned slower, casual touches shortened, conversations turned mechanical, stripped of the intimacy we once shared. In business, he still relied on me, but my voice carried less weight. I had become the scaffolding holding up his world, no longer the partner building it with him. One evening, as we reviewed numbers with our accountant, I caught him chuckling at a text, too warm, too familiar. I glimpsed a string of heart emojis on his screen. No name, no context, just a connection glowing through pixels. My stomach sank. I wanted to confront him, to demand answers. But instead, I swallowed it. Focus on the projections, I told myself. Focus on growth. Focus on the plan. But I couldn't quiet the whisper. He was slipping into a place I couldn't follow. Weeks passed, and the patterns grew undeniable. Invitations dried up. Friends hesitated around me, as though they knew what I didn't. I saw a new name appear on his phone, messages filled with warmth I hadn't felt in months. Jealousy and dread pulsed through me, but I buried it beneath work, unwilling to disrupt the momentum I had fought so hard to create. Another milestone came. Praise from investors, glowing media coverage, the kind of success we once dreamed of. We toasted with cheap sparkling wine. Yet even as we clinked glasses, his eyes were fixed on his phone, laughter spilling out for someone else. I forced a smile, joked along, celebrated with him, but inside I felt the shadow of truth settling over me. That night, alone in our apartment, I replayed every detail. The distracted glances, the missed touches, the stolen messages. And I realized these weren't small cracks anymore. They were fractures. I had given him my energy, my comfort, my time, my peace, and in return, I had been slowly erased from his heart. I didn't yet know the full betrayal waiting ahead, but I felt the first cut of it. The knowledge that I was losing him not to ambition, not to circumstance, but to someone else. Someone who, on paper, had nothing to offer except presence, charm, and the simplicity he no longer found in me. And in that painful realization, a seed of resolve quietly took root. I didn't know how or when, but deep down, I began to understand. If he could turn away, I could endure. I could rise. I could reclaim what was mine, my story. But for now, I stayed, watching, hurting, fading into the background of the empire I had helped him build, while the first strands of betrayal slowly, silently wove themselves into our lives. By the time I fully grasped what was happening, the affair had already been alive for months. I can still recall the moment the realization hit me, not through a confession, not even a careless slip, but through the unmistakable rhythm of his behavior. He was no longer the man who leaned on me, who shared every detail of his day, who sought my input before making decisions. He had learned to live in two worlds, the one I had built with him and the one he was quietly building with someone else. It began with small shifts. Texts that disappeared the instant I walked into the room, calls he answered outside, his voice low and tender in a way I hadn't heard directed at me in months. I wanted to confront him, demand the truth, scream, make him face what I suspected. But I couldn't. A part of me clung to hope that it was all in my head, that it was just a phase, that he was still mine. Then came the day I first heard her name. It slipped out casually from a colleague, but it landed in my chest like a stone. I had never heard of her, yet something inside me immediately recognized the threat. From then on, I noticed everything. The way his eyes softened at her messages, the way his attention shifted, the hollow tone in his voice when he spoke to me. Suddenly, every unexplained distance, every distracted smile, every forced celebration made sense. The pain was indescribable. I had poured myself into building everything. Every investor call, every pitch, every headline had my fingerprints on it. And yet, he had chosen to give his heart to someone who had contributed nothing to the struggle. My sacrifices had built the stage, but she had taken the spotlight. What cut deepest wasn't only the betrayal, it was being erased, replaced by someone who hadn't shared the nights of ramen, the endless planning, the exhaustion, the fight to keep the dream alive. I noticed the little things, his phone always at his side, the quiet chuckles when she texted, the pet names I would never hear again. One night, I peeked over his shoulder, heart pounding, and saw the truth laid bare, messages full of intimacy, of connection, of tenderness. Words that used to belong to me. For weeks, I played along, pretending nothing had changed. I still ran the logistics, still handled the planning, still managed the empire we had built together. I smiled when he acknowledged my help, but inside I was hollow. I wasn't his partner anymore. I was just the scaffolding propping up his success. One night, alone in the office after he'd left for yet another meeting, I stared out at the city lights reflecting across my desk. Rage and disbelief battled with sorrow and numbness. How could someone I had given everything to, time, love, trust, loyalty, so easily give himself to someone else? How could he betray not just me, but the very life we had built together? The irony suffocated me. I had imagined the victories, the celebrations, the laughter we would share. Instead, I found myself in the shadows, watching him beam at messages meant for someone else. She had nothing compared to me. No history, no sacrifice, no shared battles. Yet she had what mattered most: his presence, his affection, his attention. The signs were undeniable now. Nights out that were never mentioned. Mutual acquaintances dropping her name as though it were harmless. Online exchanges I couldn't ignore. Slowly, painfully, I came to accept the truth. I was being replaced. My fury burned hot, but alongside it, a cold, sharp clarity took root. I remember the night I finally allowed myself to feel it all. Alone on our balcony, I sat under the city lights, each one flickering like a witness to my heartbreak. I thought about every sleepless night, every ounce of energy, every dream I had invested in him. And I understood. He hadn't just betrayed me. He had betrayed every version of us we once promised to become. I didn't scream. I didn't rage. I simply let the grief wash over me, and in its wake, I felt something new, resolve. I would endure. I would rise. I would not let his betrayal define me. He could lose himself in her temporary glow, but I would reclaim my life, my dignity, my peace. From that point on, even as I continued to support his growing empire, I began planning. Not revenge, but survival. Not destruction, but rebirth. I would ensure that when he looked back, he would see not the woman he discarded, but the one who rose from the ruins stronger than he could ever imagine. What I didn't yet realize was that those quiet, painful months of endurance and silence were already laying the foundation for everything that would come next. Those first days, once the truth was impossible to deny, were brutal. I felt hollow, as if someone had carved out a piece of my chest and left nothing behind. It wasn't just heartbreak, it was the suffocating reality that the person I had built my life around had chosen someone else. Someone less invested, someone who, in so many ways, felt smaller. I remember sitting on our balcony, watching the city lights stretch endlessly and asking myself, how did it come to this? But the thing about loss, cruel as it is that it forces you to face yourself. I started small. I left the apartment early in the morning and refused to return until nightfall. I ate foods I had once denied myself, worked out, ran through streets I'd known for years but never really noticed. For the first time in a long time, I started breathing again, really breathing, without waiting for his presence to set the rhythm. Rebuilding didn't happen overnight. It took late nights, early mornings, journals filled with raw thoughts, and countless hours of reflection. I realized I had spent so much time building a man's empire that I had completely neglected my own dreams. Every spreadsheet, every investor call, every sleepless night, none of it had been for me. And for what? To watch him drift into someone else's arms. I went back to the skills I'd honed in our startup days. I reached out to old contacts, rekindled professional relationships, and slowly began creating opportunities for myself. There was fear. Fear of failing alone, fear of losing what little confidence I had left. But with each small win, every email answered, every client who said yes, a piece of me was rebuilt. I started consulting on my own. Nothing flashy, nothing big at first, just honest, steady work where I was recognized and in control. The irony wasn't lost on me. After years of building someone else's life, I was finally building my own. Stronger this time, with hard-earned lessons built into every step. Of course, there were nights when I still thought of him. Sometimes bitter, sometimes wistful, sometimes with an ache of nostalgia. I replayed moments, the laughter, the dreams, the promises. But the tone shifted. It became less about loss and more about strength, about what I had uncovered in myself. I learned to embrace solitude. Coffee shops, long walks, quiet nights with a journal, these became my sanctuary. I realized that peace doesn't come from being loved back. It comes from recognizing your own worth and refusing to let someone else's choices define it. Then opportunities started multiplying. Clients recommended me. Projects expanded. My reputation grew. Quietly at first, then with momentum I hadn't expected. Work became a source of joy, a place where I could see real results. And slowly, that hollow ache from his betrayal transformed into fuel for growth. Eventually, the hardest realization hit. I no longer needed him. The empire I had helped him build? Irrelevant. The recognition he received for work I'd contributed to? Irrelevant. What mattered was that I had survived, rebuilt, and carved out space that was mine alone. I even started laughing again. Sometimes at memories that once stung, sometimes at the absurdity of how much I had given to someone who never truly valued it. There was relief, yes, but more than that, there was freedom. I wasn't angry anymore. I was free. Months turned into years. My small consultancy grew into a thriving business. My clients respected me, my team looked to me for guidance, and confidence became my quiet armor. I discovered that success feels entirely different when it's earned for yourself, not as a byproduct of someone else's ambition. And I learned to trust again, but carefully. Not quickly, not blindly, but slowly, on my own terms. I realized my heart wasn't strong because it could endure betrayal, but because I had chosen to rise, to honor myself, and to reclaim my own story. By the time I reached stability and self-respect, the memory of him no longer stung. He became a ghost, distant, irrelevant, an echo of a chapter that no longer defined me. I could acknowledge what we built, but it no longer weighed me down. And then I started dreaming again. Dreams that were mine alone. Travel, ventures, love, adventures. Nothing tied to him, nothing defined by someone else's needs. For the first time, I felt truly free. I wasn't the woman who built a man's life and lingered in the shadows anymore. I was the woman who had survived, learned, and thrived on her own terms. The fact that I did it without him, without needing him, was intoxicating. Quiet, but undeniably powerful. Now, when I lie in bed at night, listening to the hum of the city, I realize that what he took from me, my love, my trust, my years of effort, ended up leading me to something far greater, my own life, reclaimed and fully alive. Years passed, and I became someone almost unrecognizable from the girl who once clung to his dreams as if they were mine. My business flourished, my life grew full, and the sharp sting of betrayal dulled into a quiet resilience. I learned to move through the world without waiting for anyone's approval, and that freedom was intoxicating. Still, in rare moments of stillness, a flicker of curiosity surfaced. What had become of him? Then, unexpectedly, he returned. Not with grand gestures or dramatic entrances, but quietly, cautiously, as though testing if I still existed in the corner of his world he once occupied. I caught glimpses of him at conferences, in fleeting social media posts, and in emails where my name appeared again. Formal, polite, careful. He was older now, warier, carrying the weight of success that felt empty without someone who had once believed in him completely. The first time he reached out directly, the old knot tightened in my stomach, a tangled mix of anger, nostalgia, and disbelief. His message was polite, cautious, a shadow of the man I remembered. "Can we meet?" it read. I thought about it, not because I wanted him back, but because I wanted to see him, to measure what time had carved into him, to witness the consequences of choices that once wounded me so deeply. I agreed. We met in a quiet cafe, one unfamiliar to both of us. He looked at me with the same intensity as before, but something had shifted. Humility, perhaps shame, and an acknowledgement of the distance his actions had created. His empire, his achievements, all seemed to shrink compared to the woman sitting across from him, confident, composed, alive in a way he could no longer influence. He began to speak, apologizing for past mistakes, admitting he had been foolish, that he had taken me for granted. I listened in silence. I didn't interrupt, didn't argue, didn't plead. I simply watched as the man who had once been my entire world faced the truth that he had lost the best part of it. For a moment, silence stretched between us. I realized I could feel compassion without weakness, and understanding without surrender. He wanted my attention, my care, my support. But this time, I was the one in control. This was my story now, not his. When I finally spoke, it was with calm certainty, not anger. I told him I had built a life of my own, that I had risen from the shadows he left behind, and that I was at peace. I told him our past would always exist, that I valued the lessons, the growth, even the love we had once shared, but that it no longer held power over me. He listened, his eyes wide, perhaps realizing for the first time the full weight of what he had lost. I felt no urge to reopen old wounds. I let the pain rest, acknowledged it, and allowed it to dissolve into strength. My power didn't come from revenge. It came from survival, from self-respect, from choosing myself above all else. After we parted, I walked away lighter than I had in years. The city felt brighter, the air sharper. I understood that closure doesn't always need confrontation, that peace doesn't always require reconciliation, and that true strength isn't measured by someone else's regret, but by the life you build out of broken pieces. In the days that followed, I noticed the smallest things. How freely I laughed, how easily I made decisions, how rarely my thoughts wandered back to him. And when they did, it wasn't with longing, it was with reflection. I had reclaimed not just my story, but myself. I was whole, unshakable, and no longer bound by anyone else's choices. I would never erase the past, nor diminish the love I once felt. It shaped me, gave me resilience, and allowed me to rise higher than I ever imagined. But now, I moved forward unburdened, each choice mine, each breath my own. At night, with the city's hum soft behind closed windows, I let myself drift into calm, the way one drifts into dreams. The past was a faint whisper. The present was warmth. The future belonged entirely to me. I whispered to myself gently, almost like a lullaby. I survived. I thrived. I am enough. End of scrims.